Okay. All right, my presentation today is recovering the Anglicized Chhé'ee Fókaa, Northeastern Pomo. It's attested in an unpublished Autochthonous word list. So Chhé'ee Fókaa is also known in the literature as Northeastern Pomo or Salt Pomo, and it is one of 7 mutually unintelligible Pomoan languages, once spoken in Northern California. Now, importantly, all 7 of these languages are completely different. They were not able to communicate with one another, and several of these languages have their own dialects. Unfortunately, other than Chhé'ee Pomo, the Pomo languages have traditionally been known by pseudo-geographical names, so northern, northeastern, central, eastern, southeastern, southern, etc., which has given the unfortunate impression that they are just mere dialects of a single language. Now, Northeastern Pomo was the only Pomoan language that was in the Sacramento River drainage, and the only Pomoan language whose speakers did not have territory contiguous with any other speakers of the Pomoan language. Okay. And you can see here on this map. So Northeastern Pomo is marked NE. It's in the little blue zone, and you'll see there's a small town called Stonyford, and that's the only town in the historic homeland of Northeastern Pomo speakers. All the Pomoan languages are in light blue. Wapo, which is completely unrelated to that family, is in dark blue. And then you've got Coast Miwok below the Pomona area and Lake Miwok. They're in a separate family. Yuki might or might not be related to Wapo. It is in a separate family. And then surrounding Northeastern Pomo speakers on 2 of the sides, other than the Yuki side, are speakers of Wind Twin languages, Patwin and Nimlaki. Okay. So the Northeast Pomo sound system is known with a pretty high level of detail. It's similar to most of Pomoan languages in having adjectives, having no voice fricatives. It's a little unusual in having a labial fricative. Only one other Pomoan language innovated one of those, and it has borrowed a lateral adjective from neighboring Winton. Okay. And the grammar will play a large role in our discussion today, but here's a quick overview. It's similar to other Pomoan languages. Verbs can be fairly complex, mainly suffixing. If they have a prefix, it's often what's known in the literature as an instrumental prefix, which really has more to do with the manner of the verb. Northeastern Pomo is unusual in having innovated a first-person singular nominative agreement suffix. Adjectives are verb-like when they're predicative, and in that role, they take many of the suffixes shared with verbs, up to and including that person marking suffix. When they're attributive, they're unmarked. Kinship terms are fairly complex and include a root, an obligatory prefix showing possession, and case suffix. The case marking system of this language is nominative accusative, which is totally unlike the other 6 Pomoan languages. And case is obligatory in pronouns and kinship terms and highly animate common nouns. And unlike other Pomoan languages, there is not a distinction outside of the kinship system between alienable and inalienable stress. Currently, there are no living full speakers of the language. The last fluent speaker, Minnie Bill, passed away roughly about 1970. The last partial speakers with significant knowledge of the language passed away toward the end of the 1900s. But there's still several living elders who recall several words and phrases with anglicized pronunciation. And though the speakers of this language were so few in number by the time the American period began that they never had federal recognition. They never had a reservation. Um, they don't exist on paper. The descendants alive today have come together. They have formed a 501c3 nonprofit in California. The right-hand side of the slide, this is an actual screenshot of their nonprofit. There's their logo. And they've held about a year's worth of language revitalization classes. And so there's increased knowledge within the community of the language, such as it's documented. And the extant documentation is fairly sparse. There's a single publication devoted to the language in the early part of the 20th century. 3 scholars, Samuel Barrett, C. Hart Merriam, and Alfred Kroeber, collected word lists from speakers, but none of these researchers had sophisticated transcription methods, and so these records aren't clear enough and well transcribed enough to use with surety because of the complexity of the language sound system. Abraham Halpern made a very brief trip, and his records form the bulk of what we have that we can trust. He had a keen ear. He collected many words and the only lengthy narrative text, but he had no audio data. And then Sally McClendon had a very, very brief field trip in the late 1950s where she recorded on a very early cassette recorder the last fluent speaker, Minnie Bill, who's otherwise not recorded at all, and then 2 partial speakers, Sharkey Moore, who had Anglicized pronunciation, and Oscar McDaniel, whose primary language was Hill Patwin and had Patwinized pronunciation. And there's no written transcript of these audio records that are of very poor quality. Toward the end of the 20th century, Robert Oswald went up to the Stoneyford area, but by then there were only partial speakers left, including Sharkey Moore, as mentioned above, and Oswald was able to make some audio recordings and also transcribed certain things. And all of the above, with the exception of Kroeber's data, are archived at Berkeley. I've assembled a lexical database that has all known written examples collected from fluent speakers. So it allows me to, if there anything has been collected, I can look it up. And in 2017 and 2019, I was able to meet with Northeastern elders and collect all the words and phrases that they remember in their Anglicized pronunciation. So using the Western Institute for Endangered Languages scale to assess how fragmented a language is, Northeastern Pomo currently is D420. The 0 is there are no speakers, and there haven't been fluent speakers for a long time. Audio is rated as moderate. It's a very poor quality, but there's more than just a recording. There's, several recordings, and the person making the recordings was a linguist. And so there's something there. Materials are fantastic, even though we don't have enough to really, truly, completely document this language as we'd like. We do have a lot, and there's a lot that can be said. Right now, there's just the one publication of paper, and you can see in parentheses down there that there's not much we can do to increase the rest of it, but we could get to A4 to 0 if a grammar and dictionary are eventually produced, which I hope to do at some point in time. Now, this presentation is all about a very unique word list. So in 2017, I met Northeastern elders for the first time. This was a serendipitous thing. I had been working on the language off and on for several years, completely through archival resources, and I traveled to Stoneyford simply to get photographs of the town so that I would have pictures to put into what I hope will be a grammar of the language someday. And while in the town at a very small gas station / mini mart shop, was told that the granddaughters of Sharkey Moore were visiting in town, and they walked into the shop while I was there. We hit it off. Next thing you know, I'm invited to their home about an hour away from Stoneyford, and they produce this word list. Now, The elders who gave me this word list weren't completely sure of who and how it was, by whom and how it was composed, other than their grandfather, Sharkey Moore, and their aunt Beulah Van Landingham were involved. So in 2018, I was able to type this word list up, and we'll look at this before the presentation's over. And that transcription is available on Wield's website for those who want to look at it on their own time. So how is the word list structured? So the copy given to me was photocopied. It was typed, and after having been typed, idiosyncratic diacritics have been handwritten, and then that document had been photocopied. And it was my understanding that the copy given to me is one of many copies that had been disseminated among the family and passed around and passed down for at least 20 years, and possibly a bit more. Now, the entries in this word list were entered and ordered in a very unusual way. The order of entries did not follow the headwords, which are all in Northeastern Pomo, or as we'll see, some other unrelated indigenous languages of the greater Stonyford area, but by the first letter of the English translation. However, that alphabetization was done such that the first words are those with no English translation. And see if I can just show that. Bear with me a second here. All right, so here is my transcript of the word list. We'll come back to the second, but if you can see, it just starts with the indigenous language words, and there's no translation right through the first about page and a half. I can't explain how and why Willow Rope got in there, but you have, the A's going after that, and it's otherwise pretty clearly ordered by first letter. All right, let's go back to presentation here. Okay. So origins, there's evidence for an original handwritten source, excuse me. So the final document appears to have been written in a 2-column table in a computer document, within which entries were ordered by the first words of the second column. And as I said before, the handwritten diacritics show that whatever type of word processing program that was available at that time, the composer of this word list did not have the ability to type in these diacritics. Obviously, when you see the complexity of diacritics, these weren't just added willy-nilly afterward. And so it seems that there were one or more original handwritten documents that had these diacritics in them. And there are numerous vowel digraphs and trigraphs combined with these. And so I was able to go through and break them down on the basis of base letter, the base letter with additional letters added afterward in such a way they're meant to modify the vowel. Those same base letters with the diacritics available in the document, and then the combinations of base letter with a diacritic plus additional vowels. Now, Northeastern Pomo, the traditional language, had a total of 5 vowel qualities, and these vowel qualities could be long or short. So 10 vowels would be the maximum number you could use in an analysis. Anglicized Northeastern Pomo doesn't keep the quantity distinction, and it's sort of outside the scope of what we can discuss here. But I've been able to analyze recordings of those speakers, and it seems that you're dealing with about 10 vowel qualities. So if you look at this table, you're seeing many more ways to represent vowels than would be necessary for either the traditional language or even an anglicized version of the language. Right. Evidence of multiple authors. So the diacritics, beyond being outside the printability of the original electronic document composer's equipment, are inconsistent and seem to be the work of more than one author. The same word also can appear in this document with different spellings, right? And some forms in the record record pronunciations that seem to be at odds with those that recorded for Sharkey Moore, the only partial speaker that we know is associated with this document in the oral history given me by the elders who gave me the document, and we also know was being interviewed by various anthropologists and linguists in the 1900s. So here's an example from the document. These three words occur in this order in the document, and you can see the translation: home and hill, home and hill, home and hill, right? And if you look to the left, you can see that's the same word each time, but the kind of homemade phonetic spelling is completely different. Now, if a single person had composed this document, it seems unlikely that person would, one, have felt the need to write home and hill 3 times in a row, and two, would use completely different ways to show the pronunciation. And in fact, the first translation, where it says home and hill cripplefoot, allows us to recover the initial word. And that word is comma, foot. Now, the spelling C-O-M-M-A and the spelling C-O-M-A seem to indicate an anglicized pronunciation of comma. But the spelling C-U-M-A likely represents an anglicized pronunciation of comma or comma. This actually makes sense because when recording the grandchildren of Sharkey, who are also partial speakers, just with a much more limited vocabulary, occasionally they would show an English caret phoneme for what I would expect to be ah. And one of the reasons seems to be that stress was variable. We don't yet understand how it could move, but the same word might have a different syllable stressed depending on the phrase it was in. And it seems that if anglicized, if English-speaking learners encountered a word more often with the stress moved somewhere, they would interpret an unstressed short A as an English caret. Okay. Now, another clue that we're dealing with multiple speakers and, I would argue potentially scribes and authors, is it is a multilingual document. So the composer of the word list must have spoken at least, obviously, Northeastern Pomo, but also Hill Patwin. And I don't know enough, possibly also Namlaki. And you can see that oftentimes in the word list, there's overt marking of which language is associated with each entry. So you see here that Angelica Root Mountain in the initial entry, here at the top right, is marked as Stonyford language. Remember, Stonyford being the town in Northeast Pomo territory. We have the exact same place name, Angelica Root Mountain, but now it says Paka Fókaa language, which is probably something like Paka Fókaa. Now, elsewhere in the document, this same word is translated as panther people. And looking at Patwin, we find that the root for cougar does begin with P-A in Patwin, but the rest of this word is entirely Northeastern Pomo. That ga is a animate nominative case marker that's obligatory on highly animate noun citation form, and Fókaa ends in the same suffix, but means people. Okay. You also see here on the right, baby basket, Ladoga people, Ladoga being the town nearest Stonyford, but Ladoga was Hill Patwin territory. And a different word for baby basket being marked as Stonyford. So who were the contributors? We've already been told that Sharkey Moore and Beulah Van Landingham were involved. The inclusion of so many, well, as far as I can tell, true Patwin words suggested Oscar McDaniel, a partial speaker who was also interviewed by several linguists and anthropologists during the same period, whose primary language was Hill-Patwin, was likely involved as well. And other partial speakers might have participated. Okay. Was this word list known to other researchers? So Robert Oswald did record a member of the community, Arlene Butler, spelling something. This is her own transcription, and you can see it here. I won't try to pronounce it. Okay, and Oswald then rewrote that. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong slide. In his own system to try and spell it the way he heard her say it. And when we look at the database for Northeastern Pomo, we can find that that first word is clearly bread. Muhkul, muhkul. But if we look at Arlene Butler's transcription and Oswald's phonetic transcription of her speech, there's a completely different vowel in that initial syllable. Right. So this is clearly not a traditional pronunciation. This is an anglicized pronunciation. We've lost that laryngeal increment, that H, and the unstressed vowel has reduced to something unrounded. All right. Now, the second word in Arlene Butler's transcription appears to be an imperative form of to eat. Okay. So it would seem that her pronunciation was something like makul ma'ata. And that if we were to reconstruct what this phrase might have sounded like in the original language, it would have been something like muhkul ma'ata. So not too different. Now, do we see Arlene Butler's transcription in the word list? Remember, we have evidence here from the late 20th century that a member of the community was not only writing down phrases in the language, but using diacritics, non-English diacritics. Well, we do find both of these words in the word list, but not together and not remotely spelled the same way that Arlene Butler spelled them. So we find muhkul in the place name for burnt bread camp, but the spelling completely different. Each syllable is given a space between it. The first vowel is written as A with a dot over it. The stressed vowel in muhkul is a double O with a macron over it. And then the vowel, the final syllable, is again the A with a dot over it. I don't know what that final syllable stands for, but we can see that probably makul, very similar to Arlene Butler's pronunciation, is being indicated here, but not spelled the way that Arlene Butler spelled it in the extant record. And something similar goes on for time to eat. We can find that in the word list, and it's spelled completely differently. So what we know is if Oswald encountered the source material for this word list, I haven't found a record of it yet. It seems that he did encounter the use of diacritics to try and preserve words, and it looks like it was a pretty robust tradition within the community at some point. But the actual word list that we have doesn't seem to have been noticed by him if it existed. All right, can we recover the sounds, the sound of symbol mapping? Were the writers fluent speakers? And all the evidence points to this word list being a rather late creation by partial speakers, which lines up with the oral history from the family. Again, Sharkey Moore and Beulah Van Lanningham were not fluent speakers. Minnie Bill, who was known to them, had passed away, by about 1970. And the source material for this word list seems to post-date that period. And there's a lot of evidence for that. We've seen it before where laryngeal augments seem to be missing and vowel qualities have changed. But probably one of the biggest shibboleths is the word for red. The descendants of Sharkey Moore remember this word, and they pronounce it as Shabbos, Shabbos. In the traditional language, when it was predicative, it was either t'abaran or t'abaran, but as an attributive adjective, it was t'abash, t'abash. That final sound is an allophone of R encoded position. And what I've discovered in looking at the relation between Anglicized Northeastern Pomo pronunciation and the traditional language, Northeastern Pomo had no S. It had merged S and esh due to contact with wind twin languages. The Anglicized form consistently distinguishes that coda allophone of R from esh by using either S or theta. So the Shabbos pronunciation is very true to that correspondence by having the S, but using the esh in place of the adjective cha is otherwise unattested and seems to be just something that affected this word. So this seems to be a kind of a family pronunciation, Shabbos for chabas. And in the word list, we see red eye spring, where we can reconstruct this as in the traditional language would have been ka chabas. And they've got it written as something like ka Shabbos. So it seems pretty clear that the words in this word list are coming from an anglicized variety of the language. And can recover the meanings? Well, one of the major issues is this word list seems to have really been put together to remember all the many place names in the Stonyford Valley. And in fact, the creators of the word list put asterisks before each word that was a place name. Many of these place names are now unknown, or if they are known, it would take a lot of work to recover them because they're mentioned relative to other obscure place names now on private property and private ranches. And then there seems to be a generous amount of Hill Patwin and possibly Namlaki words in there as well. So there's much that can be recovered, but and there's a lot that's difficult to uncover. So a summary: this word list was likely composed by 3 or more partial speakers, Northeastern Pomo, at least one of whom was likely a full or partial speaker of Hill Patwin. The original writing of these forms must date to the late 1900s, likely before 1990. The original scribes are different from the speakers, use idiosyncratic spellings and diacritics. There's evidence from Oswald's notes of a community internal use of non-English diacritics in the late 1900s by Arlene Butler, whose spellings differ substantially from those found in the word list. And it's likely that these different spellings represent not just different scribes and speakers, but different handwritten documents and were later merged. The final product must have been typed on a computer and sorted by English translation. And what use is the word list? Well, I think it's a very rare example of a community internal language document that was entirely created by the community and disseminated, over a period of decades by the community to multiple generations. And though it's difficult to read, it's a crucial window into this incredibly linguistically diverse corner of California, where language from 3 unrelated language families abutted one another in an area basically the size of Los Angeles. And of course, it also sheds light on the community-wide use of an anglicized phonology during the language obsolescence stage of the language. And I will just quickly show you the word list one more time. And you can see here, there's a lot going on. But one thing that came up during the initial presentation of this was this form right here. It seems like one of the original scribes tended to use English words whenever those words were roughly homophonous with what was being represented. And that might be a clue into how to separate one scribe from another. But what's also important is where it says, "Are you hungry?" I believe I can reconstruct the original form. And I think that ma might be short for ma'a, which is food. And what looks like common toe would be the inflected verb form, either amanto or amanto, which would be literally to hunger, default verbal suffix, first person singular nominative agreement marker. In other words, this says, "I'm hungry." And as a commenter pointed out, this seems to be evidence that not only are we dealing with different scribes who are trying to write down what elders are telling them, but it looks like there might have been direct elicitation attempts, so that in the confusion of the elicitation, what's written down is not what was actually elicited. So I thank you all for attending my talk. And please email me or message me if you have any comments. And yep, thank you.